The Miami sun, relentless and unforgiving, hammered down on Liberty City, each ray a molten weight pressing on the already sweltering air. Humidity, thick as a shroud, clung to everything, making each breath a labored task. Aisha Jones, a black woman whose very posture radiated an aura of quiet strength forged in the crucible of unimaginable pressures, walked homeward, grocery bags digging into her palms. The vibrant murals that exploded across the walls of buildings, bold declarations of Black history and resilience, offered a defiant splash of color against the backdrop of simmering tensions that perpetually underlay life in this neighborhood. Aisha, recently returned stateside after a grueling, morally ambiguous overseas deployment, sought the mundane sanctuary of her community, a balm of normalcy to soothe the raw edges of her soul. She craved respite from the perpetual adrenaline, the constant vigilance that had become her second skin. As she turned onto Northwest 7th Avenue from 62nd Street, the screech of tires ripped through the humid stillness. A black and white police cruiser, a predatory shadow, materialized at the curb, tires protesting with a high-pitched whine against the sun-baked asphalt. A white officer erupted from the driver's side, his movements abrupt, his stance radiating an immediate and unsettling aggression. His polished name tag glinted in the harsh sunlight. Officer Miller. Aisha, though jolted by the sudden intrusion, maintained an outward calm. Years of ruthless training had instilled in her an almost preternatural ability to assess threats instantaneously, to calculate responses with split-second precision, skills honed to a razor's edge during her tenure in the Navy SEALs. "You there, stop right there," Miller barked, his voice amplified by a practiced harshness, each word a sharp jab. Aisha halted, her movements deliberate, placing the overladen grocery bags gently onto the cracked sidewalk. "Officer, is there a problem?" she inquired, her voice measured, betraying none of the sudden, cold unease that had begun to prickle beneath her carefully constructed composure. Years of covert operations had taught her the subtle art of masking internal turmoil, of presenting a facade of impenetrable calm even as alarm's bells screamed within. "Don't get smart with me, lady," Miller snapped back, advancing towards her with a theatrical swagger, each step radiating a performative sense of authority, a crude pantomime of power. "You know damn well why I stopped you." Aisha's brow furrowed, a slight, involuntary crease in her otherwise placid forehead. "Actually, officer, I genuinely do not. I was simply walking home from the grocery store." Her gaze, direct and unwavering, met his, challenging him to articulate a legitimate reason for this blatant harassment. "Loitering," Miller declared, the word spat out like an accusation, his tone dismissive, contemptuous. "Loitering and obstructing the public sidewalk. You perfectly fit the description." His eyes, hard and assessing, raked over her body, a blatant, dehumanizing appraisal that ignited a slow burn of anger in the pit of Aisha's stomach. It was a gaze she knew intimately, a gaze that saw not an individual, but a stereotype, a preconceived notion of criminality based solely on the color of her skin. "Fit the description of what, officer?" Aisha challenged, her voice remaining steady, but now laced with a barely perceptible edge of steel. She understood, with chilling clarity, that this encounter was not about loitering, not about obstructing the sidewalk. This was something far more insidious, something deeply rooted in prejudice and systemic bias. "Don't play innocent games with me," Miller scoffed, his lip curling into a sneer. "We've received credible reports of suspicious activity in this immediate vicinity. And frankly, you fit the profile perfectly." He closed the remaining distance between them, deliberately invading her personal space, his posture radiating an almost predatory intimidation. Aisha, drawing on years of steely discipline, stood her ground, refusing to yield, her gaze locked with his, an unspoken challenge hanging heavy in the humid air. "Officer, with all due respect," Aisha began, her voice still measured, yet now imbued with an unmistakable undercurrent of defiance. "I am a tax-paying resident of this neighborhood, returning to my own home a mere block from here. If you possess a specific and lawful reason for this intrusive stop, I would deeply appreciate you articulating it with clarity and professionalism. rather than resorting to vague accusations and veiled threats. Miller's face, already flushed from the oppressive heat and his own rising agitation, deepened to a furious crimson. His eyes narrowed to malevolent slits. He clearly deeply resented being questioned, challenged, especially by a black woman who dared to assert her rights, her dignity, in the face of his perceived authority. "You're resisting," he accused, his voice cracking with manufactured indignation, rising in volume to attract the attention of any potential witnesses. "You're actively resisting and obstructing a legitimate police investigation. That's a felony offense, you understand that, lady?" The word dripped with sarcasm, with barely concealed contempt. "Resisting what, officer?" Aisha retorted, her carefully maintained patience finally fraying, a spark of righteous anger igniting in her voice. "You have yet to articulate any semblance of a legitimate reason for initiating this stop. Walking home with groceries in broad daylight is emphatically not a crime, in this neighborhood or any other. That's it. I've had it with your mouth." Miller bellowed, his carefully constructed veneer of lawful authority abruptly shattering, replaced by raw, unadulterated rage. "I'm done playing games with you. You're under arrest right now." He lunged forward with alarming suddenness, his hand a brutal claw clamping down on Aisha's arm, his grip bruisingly tight. "Under arrest for what?" Aisha exclaimed, a surge of shock and righteous indignation coursing through her veins. She recoiled instinctively from his violent grasp, her years of ingrained SEAL training exploding into action, her movements reflexive, defensive, honed by countless hours of combat drills, sharp, precise, and designed to create space, to de-escalate, not to escalate the physical confrontation. Her reaction was pure self-preservation, a lifetime of instinct screaming in protest against unwarranted aggression. This minimal, entirely defensive reflexive movement, however, was all the pretext, all the twisted justification Officer Miller's simmering prejudices and already inflamed ego required. Resisting arrest. Assaulting a police officer, he bellowed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing down the street, designed to intimidate, to control the narrative, to justify his escalating violence. Passers-by, initially going about their day, stopped dead in their tracks, their heads turning towards the unfolding scene, their faces registering a mixture of shock, apprehension, and a weary, almost defeated familiarity with such displays of police aggression in their neighborhood. "I did not assault you, officer," Aisha protested, her voice ringing with undisguised outrage, battling to be heard over Miller's escalating tirade. "I simply moved back reflexively when you grabbed me, without any legal cause. I defended myself from your unprovoked assault." Miller, deaf to reason, blind to truth, relentlessly ignored her desperate pleas, wrestling her with brute force, shoving her against the cold, unyielding metal of the police cruiser. He fumbled awkwardly for his handcuffs, his movements fueled by a volatile cocktail of adrenaline and unchecked anger. "You're going to learn to respect authority, lady," he snarled, his words dripping with a chilling undercurrent of racial animosity, a venomous hatred thinly veiled beneath the facade of law enforcement. The arrest was a brutal, dehumanizing spectacle, witnessed by a growing knot of silent, somber onlookers. Miller, propelled by his own deep-seated prejudices and unchecked, escalating aggression, twisted Aisha's arms with agonizing force behind her back, brutally disregarding her sharp cries of pain and protest as he ratcheted the handcuffs tighter and tighter, the cold metal biting cruelly into her wrists. He then shoved her roughly into the cramped confines of the back of the cruiser with gratuitous violence, her head slamming against the unforgiving doorframe with a sickening, muffled thud that resonated with the grim inevitability of injustice. As the police cruiser accelerated away from the stunned onlookers, speeding towards the imposing concrete fortress of the downtown precinct, Aisha sat rigid in the back seat, the sting of the handcuffs a physical manifestation of the profound injustice she was enduring. Her mind raced, attempting to process the surreal, terrifying events that had just transpired. She, Aisha Jones, a decorated combat veteran, a former Navy SEAL lieutenant commander, a woman who had faced down unimaginable dangers with unwavering courage and unflinching resolve, was now under arrest, falsely accused of violent crimes she had not committed, simply for the perceived offense of walking home while black in her own neighborhood. The sheer, staggering injustice of it all threatened to overwhelm her, to crack the carefully constructed walls of her composure. But beneath the burning anger, the gnawing frustration, and the cold fear, a steely, unyielding resolve began to solidify deep within her core. She was not, and would never be, a victim. She would leverage every ounce of her training, her experience, her indomitable will to fight back, to expose the truth, and to reclaim her stolen dignity. At the sterile, harshly lit precinct, Aisha was processed with a cold, almost mechanized efficiency, each step of the dehumanizing procedure designed to strip away her individuality, to reduce her to a mere statistic, another case file in a system seemingly indifferent to justice. Her unervingly calm and collected demeanor throughout the booking process, her refusal to break down or show fear in the face of the accusatory officers and the overtly hostile environment, only seemed to further irritate her captors. They treated her with undisguised contempt, their words clipped and curt, their actions dismissive, bordering on openly abusive. No one, not a single officer, listened with genuine interest to her repeated, impassioned protests of innocence. No one appeared to genuinely care about her side of the story, about the blatant injustice she had just endured. To them, she was already guilty, prejudged, another faceless black woman caught in the unforgiving gears of the system. While Aisha was being subjected to this calculated dehumanization, Officer Miller, back in the relative comfort of the precinct's report-writing room, was already diligently crafting his official version of events, meticulously embellishing the brief, brutal encounter, skillfully painting Aisha as an aggressive, violently combative, and inherently threatening individual. He carefully portrayed himself as the epitome of the calm, restrained, and heroic law enforcement officer, forced against his better judgment to employ necessary, albeit regrettable, force to subdue a dangerous, uncooperative suspect. His official police report, meticulously crafted with carefully chosen words and strategically omitted details, was a masterwork of manipulative narrative, designed to meticulously justify his own egregious actions and effectively demonize Aisha, transforming her from victim to aggressor in the cold, unforgiving language of the law. Unbeknownst to Officer Miller, lost in his self-congratulatory fabrication of the truth, a seemingly insignificant event had occurred, a small, random act of technological providence. A dashcam, mounted on the dashboard of a nearby civilian vehicle, idly recording the mundane flow of traffic, had inadvertently captured a fragmented, imperfect, but ultimately crucial portion of the now infamous incident. The footage, grainy from distance and partially obscured by passing vehicles, was far from pristine, but it undeniably captured the initial moments of the confrontation. Miller's police cruiser screeching to a sudden, aggressive halt, his overtly confrontational and rapid approach towards Aisha, and crucially, Aisha's demonstrably calm and non-threatening demeanor in the seconds immediately preceding Miller's violent escalation. Most importantly, the imperfect video frame by frame captured the initiating act of physical aggression, Miller's abrupt and unwarranted forceful grab of Aisha's arm, and her subsequent, entirely justified verbal protests of innocence and outrage. This imperfect, accidental, but powerfully compelling video footage, though incomplete, would later unexpectedly surface and prove to be a devastatingly critical piece of evidence, a silent, unblinking witness to the truth that Miller so desperately sought to bury. Aisha, refusing to be broken by the system's calculated dehumanization, rejecting the role of passive victim they so readily assigned to her, immediately and unequivocally requested legal representation. She was intimately familiar with her rights hard-won and often denied to people who looked like her, and she was fiercely determined to exercise every single one of them to the fullest extent. Her court-appointed public defender, a seasoned and fiercely dedicated legal advocate named Sarah Chun, was initially cautiously wary when she first reviewed the case file and heard the initial, damning charges. Assaulting a police officer was a serious, uphill battle in any courtroom, especially in Miami. However, upon finally meeting Aisha face-to-face, listening intently to her meticulously detailed, internally consistent, and undeniably credible account of the brutal arrest. Sarah's initial professional skepticism began to steadily dissipate, slowly but surely replaced by a growing, unwavering conviction in her client's absolute innocence. Sarah Chun, a veteran of countless courtroom battles, possessed an almost instinctive ability to discern truth from fabrication, and in Aisha Jones's unwavering gaze, in the quiet strength of her testimony, she recognized the unmistakable hallmarks of genuine integrity. Sarah, a legal mind sharpened by years of fighting for the underdog, a tenacious and relentlessly diligent advocate for justice, immediately launched her own independent investigation, determined to unearth the truth buried beneath Miller's carefully constructed web of lies. She painstakingly tracked down and interviewed every potential witness who might have glimpsed even a fragment of the incident, though most, understandably, were hesitant to become entangled, paralyzed by a pervasive, deeply ingrained fear of potential police retaliation, a chillingly real threat in communities like Liberty City. She relentlessly demanded access to all official police reports, internal documentation, and any and all evidence related to Aisha's arrest, encountering bureaucratic stonewalling and thinly veiled hostility at every turn. And, crucially, driven by an intuitive sense that Officer Miller's seemingly aberrant behavior might be indicative of a deeper, systemic issue, she initiated a discreet but thorough investigation into Officer Miller's professional history, determined to uncover any hidden patterns, any buried secrets that might illuminate the true nature of this seemingly inexplicable act of police brutality. The courtroom on the day of Aisha's trial was packed beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation, charged with a palpable tension that crackled through the assembled crowd. The case had ignited a firestorm of local media attention, rapidly escalating beyond a mere individual case of alleged police misconduct, swiftly transforming into a potent and highly visible flashpoint for long-simmering community discussions about systemic racial profiling, endemic police brutality, and the deeply fractured trust between law enforcement and minority communities throughout Miami-Dade County. Aisha entered the courtroom with her head held high, her spine ramrod straight, her very posture radiating an aura of quiet dignity, unbreakable resolve, and unwavering self-possession. She was dressed simply, yet impeccably, in a professional suit, her demeanor composed, almost serene, a stark and deliberate contrast to the prosecution's carefully cultivated portrayal of her as a violent, out-of-control aggressor. Officer Miller, the prosecution's star witness, took the stand first, projecting an air of injured authority, a carefully rehearsed performance of aggrieved victimhood. He meticulously recounted his fabricated version of the incident, his voice practiced and earnest, his demeanor calculated to elicit sympathy and outrage. He expertly portrayed Aisha as uncooperative, verbally belligerent, physically combative, and ultimately, deeply threatening. He solemnly claimed he had acted with utmost restraint, forced by Aisha's violent aggression to employ only the bare minimum of necessary force to effectuate a lawful and entirely justified arrest. His testimony, polished to a deceptive sheen, was a calculated exercise in theatrical manipulation, skillfully designed to paint Aisha in the most damning, racially charged light imaginable, appealing to the jury's potential biases and prejudices. Under Sarah Chin's relentless and laser-focused cross-examination, however, Officer Miller's carefully constructed facade of righteous indignation and injured innocence began to demonstrably crack, splintering under the relentless pressure of truth. Sarah, with her methodical, almost surgical precision and incisive line of questioning, relentlessly chipped away at his meticulously crafted narrative, methodically exposing glaring inconsistencies, subtle contradictions, and ultimately, the blatant absence of any legitimate, legally justifiable reason for his initial stop and subsequent violent escalation. She relentlessly pressed him for concrete specifics regarding his vague description of suspicious activity, demanding verifiable details, challenging his nebulous justifications. Miller, visibly flustered and increasingly uncomfortable under Sarah's unwavering scrutiny, floundered, his carefully rehearsed answers becoming increasingly evasive, contradictory, and ultimately, utterly unconvincing. His practiced composure began to unravel, revealing the raw, unadulterated prejudice simmering beneath the surface. Then, the pivotal moment of the trial arrived, the carefully orchestrated turning point that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of the case, shifting the courtroom's collective perception with seismic force. It was Aisha's turn to testify. She ascended to the witness stand with a quiet, almost ethereal confidence that instantly commanded the undivided attention of the entire courtroom. She recounted the events of that sweltering afternoon in a clear, measured, and devastatingly compelling voice, each word ringing with authenticity, each sentence punctuated by the undeniable weight of truth. She meticulously described the sudden, utterly unwarranted stop, Officer Miller's immediate, overtly aggressive demeanor, his baseless and shifting accusations, and his shockingly rapid escalation to violence when she dared to question his unlawful authority. She maintained her composure throughout her harrowing testimony, her voice never wavering, her gaze never faltering, her unwavering sincerity radiating outwards, piercing through the carefully constructed layers of lies and prejudice that had threatened to bury her. Then, in a carefully planned, strategically timed moment of dramatic revelation, a calculated act of courtroom theater designed to maximize its impact, Sarah Chin posed a seemingly innocuous, almost throwaway question to her client. "Ms. Jones," Sarah inquired, her voice deceptively casual, "could you please, for the benefit of the court and the jury, tell us a little bit about your professional background and your prior life experiences?" Aisha paused for a beat, a pregnant silence that amplified the mounting tension in the courtroom, then turned her gaze directly towards the jury box, her eyes steady, unwavering, radiating an almost unnerving calm that belied the storm raging within. "For the past 10 years, she stated, her voice resonating with quiet power, clear and strong, cutting through the hushed anticipation that had gripped the courtroom, I served with honor and distinction as a commissioned officer in the United States Navy SEALs." A collective gasp, a wave of audible shock and disbelief, rippled through the packed courtroom. The very atmosphere of the room palpably shifted, the carefully constructed narrative of the prosecution suddenly collapsing in on itself. Heads swiveled, murmurs erupted, whispered conversations rippling through the gallery. Officer Miller, sitting stiffly at the prosecution table, his face ashen, visibly recoiled as if struck by a physical blow, his meticulously fabricated narrative instantly, irrevocably undermined. Shattered into a million pieces by Aisha's single, devastatingly impactful revelation. Sarah pressed her advantage, continuing her carefully orchestrated line of questioning, her voice now imbued with a newfound power, a quiet triumph. "Ms. Jones," Sarah continued, her tone calm but commanding, "could you please elaborate for the jury on the nature and rigor of your specialized training as a United States Navy SEAL?" Aisha, with unflinching composure, proceeded to methodically detail the truly extraordinary extent and almost unbelievable rigor of her specialized training. Years of relentless physical and mental conditioning pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance, expert-level hand-to-hand combat proficiency in multiple disciplines, mastery of an arsenal of weaponry both conventional and unconventional, rigorous training in de-escalation techniques and conflict resolution under extreme duress, and a profoundly ingrained, deeply internalized understanding of the appropriate, and often inappropriate, use of force in any and all given situations. She meticulously explained the stringent, almost monastic code of honor and unwavering ethical conduct that all SEALs were rigorously sworn to uphold, the unwavering emphasis on absolute discipline, unwavering professionalism, and almost superhuman levels of restraint, even in the most unimaginably extreme and life-threatening combat scenarios. The transformative impact of Aisha's unexpected, utterly revelatory testimony was nothing short of seismic. The carefully cultivated image of Aisha Jones as a violent, out-of-control aggressor, painstakingly constructed by the prosecution and Officer Miller, shattered instantaneously, dissolving like smoke in a sudden gust of wind. The jury, the judge, the entire courtroom, everyone present, now irrevocably perceived her in an entirely, fundamentally different light, not as a criminal threat, but as a highly trained, demonstrably disciplined, and exceptionally self-controlled professional warrior, a woman of almost superhuman capability and rigorously proven, almost unnatural restraint. Sarah Chin, seizing the momentum with expert precision, then formally introduced the long-awaited dashcam footage, projecting the grainy but undeniably crucial video onto a large screen for the entire court to witness. While imperfect and incomplete, the video undeniably corroborated Aisha's sworn account of events, visually confirming Officer Miller's overtly aggressive, almost predatory approach and, crucially, Aisha's demonstrably calm, non-threatening demeanor in the seconds immediately preceding the violent escalation. The visual evidence starkly confirmed Miller's unwarranted physical aggression towards Aisha, undermining his carefully fabricated claims of self-defense and justifiable force. The prosecution, visibly reeling, desperately sensing the palpable shift in the jury's perception and the catastrophic collapse of their meticulously constructed case, made a frantic, last-ditch attempt to discredit Aisha's remarkable Navy SEAL background, lamely and almost insultingly questioning its relevance to the present case. But Saracen, anticipating this desperate maneuver, expertly and decisively countered, forcefully arguing that Aisha's unparalleled training was not merely peripherally relevant, but absolutely central to understanding the true, understated context of her actions, and, crucially, her restraint. She powerfully argued that a woman with Aisha Jones's unparalleled training, discipline, and deep understanding of the use of force would be demonstrably, statistically, and logically far less likely to initiate an unprovoked assault on a uniformed police officer, and overwhelmingly more likely to attempt to de-escalate a potentially volatile confrontation peacefully, resorting to physical force only as an absolute last resort, in self-defense, and with extreme and meticulously calibrated restraint. Finally, in a dramatic crescendo that effectively eviscerated the prosecution's remaining case and definitively sealed Officer Miller's fate, Saracen unveiled her final, and arguably most devastating, piece of evidence. Officer David Miller's previously concealed, meticulously redacted, and deeply incriminating internal personnel file. Through weeks of relentless, painstaking investigation, Sarah had unearthed a disturbingly consistent, almost chilling pattern of formal and informal complaints meticulously documented against Officer Miller. A deeply unsettling catalog of repeated allegations of excessive force, routine racial profiling targeting minority communities, documented instances of egregious verbal abuse directed at civilians, and a pervasive, undeniable pattern of documented dishonesty and calculated manipulation of official police reports dating back several years to the very beginning of his NOPD career. These deeply troubling complaints, though routinely dismissed, downplayed, or quietly buried by internal affairs, often with little or no substantive investigation, painted a stark, undeniable, and deeply damning portrait of an officer with a long and meticulously documented history of egregious misconduct, unchecked aggression, and a deeply troubling, overly racist pattern of systematically targeting vulnerable minority communities with impunity. The cumulative revelations contained within Officer Miller's meticulously concealed personnel file were nothing short of catastrophic for the prosecution's already crumbling case. The carefully constructed edifice of their narrative, built upon lies, prejudice, and manipulated evidence, definitively and irrevocably collapsed. The jury, having meticulously absorbed all the presented evidence, both visual, auditory, and testimonial, and finally seeing the stark truth laid bare before them, deliberated for a remarkably brief period. When they solemnly returned to the packed courtroom, their faces grim, their expressions resolute, the verdict they delivered was clear, unequivocal, and utterly resounding. Not guilty. Aisha Jones was officially, finally, and completely acquitted on all fabricated charges. A collective roar of relief, of cathartic release, of righteous vindication, erupted from the courtroom, the sound echoing through the halls of justice, shaking the very foundations of the system that had so nearly failed her. A wave of spontaneous applause and unrestrained cheers erupted from her assembled supporters, many of whom had diligently gathered day after day to witness the unfolding trial, their hopes and fears riding on the outcome. Overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion, a potent cocktail of profound gratitude and immense relief, Aisha embraced a tearful, triumphant Saracen, the weight of injustice finally lifted from her weary shoulders. Emerging from the courtroom into the glare of the waiting media, a phalanx of cameras and microphones thrust forward, Aisha addressed the assembled journalists and the expectant nation. She spoke with remarkable composure, her voice calm, measured, and deeply eloquent, not with vengeful anger or bitter recrimination, but with a quiet, unwavering call for systemic justice, for genuine accountability, and for fundamental, lasting change. She deliberately emphasized that her case was not merely about her own individual ordeal, but about the far broader, deeply entrenched, and tragically pervasive issue of endemic police misconduct, systemic racial profiling, and the urgent need for comprehensive police reform that plagued communities like Liberty City and countless others across the fractured landscape of the nation. Officer David Miller, his carefully cultivated reputation reduced to ashes, his career in irreparable tatters, was immediately placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a fully independent and rigorously transparent internal investigation. An investigation now fueled by the undeniable mountain of damning evidence meticulously presented at Aisha's trial and further amplified by his explosively revealed personnel file. The sheer weight of irrefutable evidence, combined with the overwhelming public outcry and the cascading political pressure, led to swift and decisive administrative action. He was not only summarily fired from the New Orleans Police Department, effectively ending his law enforcement career in disgrace, but also faced the looming threat of potential federal criminal charges for egregious civil rights violations, systematic falsification of evidence, and the malicious act of wrongful arrest under false pretenses. Aisha Jones's harrowing story rapidly became a potent and enduring symbol of justice, resilience, and hard-won accountability, a powerfully resonant reminder, amplified by the instantaneous global reach of social media, that even in the face of deeply entrenched systemic bias, deeply ingrained racial prejudice, and the unchecked abuse of concentrated power, the immutable force of truth, when persistently and courageously brought to the blinding light of day, could, and ultimately would, inevitably prevail. Her case forcefully underscored the critical, non-negotiable importance of ubiquitous body-worn cameras, strategically placed dashcam footage, and robust, genuinely independent civilian oversight boards in ensuring meaningful police accountability, fostering desperately needed transparency, and rebuilding the shattered trust between law enforcement agencies and the communities they were ostensibly sworn to protect and serve, especially within marginalized communities historically targeted by systemic injustices. And perhaps most importantly of all, Aisha's deeply personal ordeal and her ultimate triumph over a system rigged against her illuminated the profound resilience, unwavering inner strength, and indomitable spirit of individuals like Aisha Jones, who steadfastly refused to be silenced, who bravely stood their ground in the face of overwhelming adversity, and who tirelessly, relentlessly fought for not just their own individual liberation, but for the promise of true and lasting justice for their entire community, and for a more just, equitable, and fundamentally decent society for all. The relentless Florida sun still beat down on Liberty City, its heat still oppressive, its burdens still heavy, but in the hard-won victory of Aisha Jones, and in the definitive exposure of Officer Miller's systemic misconduct, a palpable, almost tangible sense of hope, fragile yet persistent, began to bloom, a renewed, defiant belief in the enduring possibility of justice, and a profoundly strengthened, community-wide commitment to the long, arduous, but ultimately essential, ongoing fight for lasting equality and genuine accountability within the often opaque and frequently unjust systems of law enforcement.